Well, hello again everybody and welcome back. And today's security pins. I get asked quite a lot of questions about them, and I see a lot of questions flying around about them, how to pick them. So I thought I'd try and do a little video showing it a bit better, so hopefully people can understand a bit better. So I'm using this American lock. It's actually a 6-pin lock, but only pin for 5. But it doesn't make any difference because I'm probably only going to use the first 2 chambers, and I'll pin it up with different pins and try and show you how the core reacts while we're picking. So as you can see, this comes completely with standard pins, nothing special there, and what we're going to try and work through is some of these. These are just examples. We've got standard spool, these are all commercial pins, T-pin, a slightly different spool with an elongated end on it, serrated pin. This one's a driving spool, which you can see is actually shaped in the centre, and we have an ASSA pin at the end here. So what I shall do is just pin up the first 2 chambers, just to try and keep things a bit quicker, and go through the different pins one at a time and see if we can actually see how the pins are reacting and what they're doing. So I shall be back in a second. Right, so here we go with the first test. I'm trying to get this camera in as close as possible so you can actually see what's happening. And what I've actually done is just pinned up the first 2 chambers with the standard pins, so we can see, we know what the binding order is. 1, we're getting nothing on, just got very light tension on here. 2, we just ease it up and we got a tiny little click there. Don't know if you heard it. Let's try that again. A little bit more tension. And there we go, that was that little click. Didn't really feel anything through the core because it's just standard pins. So then we come back onto 1 and we're open. So effectively that's how your standard pins will work. You won't get full sets, that sort of thing. You might get a fraction of movement in the core, but it's just listening for those clicks, finding the binding pin, listening for those clicks. So let's go back and try different pins. Right, so we're going to start off with a spool. Hopefully we can see this on the camera. So we've got a spool in chamber 2, and the base of the spool, or basically the narrow part of the spool, so we try and do this round the camera. The narrow part is on the shear line, so this should, in theory, change the binding order, so we'll end up picking 1 first. We should get a full set and then we'll see how the spool reacts. So I'll get this loaded up again and back in a second. Right, so here we are loaded up with a standard in 1 and the spool in number 2. So the lock feels no different, apart from when we go in, we now got number 1 binding. If we watch the core, there we go. So as we got the click on number 1, which was the standard, we then into a full set because we're on that narrow part of the spool. So then if we get under number 2 and with light tension, as I'm trying to pick it, hopefully we saw that. Let's try again. So let's get that. So we've got 1, then we've got the full set, nice and light on the tension, and as we push up on 2, the core's actually trying to turn back as it's wedging. I'm actually having to give this a slight bit of manual counter rotation because it's a very new lock and it's a very sharp spool in there, but hopefully we could see that. So give me a minute and I'll get this unloaded and try something else. Right, so here we have a serrated pin with the standard. So we've got the serrated in number 2. As you can see, all the serrations sit down inside the core. Apart from the very first one, it's right on the lip there. So we should feel most of those serrations as we're trying to pick it. And we'll get this loaded back up and see you in a minute. Right, so now we have the standard pin in 1 and serrated pin in 2. So lock feels just as it did before, and we go in and 1 isn't binding but 2 is, and we got a click and we come back, 1 still not binding, back onto 2 and we got a second click onto 1 and 1 is binding now. And there we go, we're open. So quite often with the serrated pins, once you get used to it, it's normally a different type of click to a standard pin setting, but it's a matter of going through and working through the clicks until you get it open. But it's the multiple clicks show you've got the serrated ones in there a lot of the time. So give me a second and we shall try another one. Right, so this time we have a T-pin, and as you can see, there it is narrowed down, sits in there quite nicely. And we have the standard pin. So what we should end up having this time is 1 binding and 2 giving us a full set, but we won't get any counter rotation from it, hopefully. So let's get this put back together again and we'll give this one a try. Right, so we have this now with the T-pin. So when we go in, what we should find is number 1 is binding, which it is. And hopefully we saw that, where we've got that kick on the core and we've now got a full set. And then if we get under 2 and just start easing 2 up and we get the open. So where you have T-pins in the challenge lock, sometimes you'll see when we're picking those where we keep on going, we've got a full set and suddenly it will just pop, and that's where a T-pin has got caught up on something with serrations, and just trying to find that one when we're getting no feedback. So that's the T-pin. If you give me a minute and we'll try another one. Alright, and this time we have an ASSA pin. I've stuck it on 1 this time, and as we can see, the main thick body of it is at the shear line. Oh, drop that driver. So we'll have to see which one binds first, but then we've got to deal with these grooves that the ASSA pins are known for, which can be a bit tricky, but we'll see how this one reacts in the lock. So give me a minute and I shall be back. Right, so now we have the ASSA pin in here. I have had to swap the order. The ASSA pin is now in number 2, just to make it work a bit better to demonstrate. So we start off as we have before. Lock feels exactly the same again. but we now have one binding. So, and we get that tiny click because that is the standard pin. And then we just touched onto two, and we got a very slight movement on the core. But now we are getting a very slight bit of counter rotation. Don't know if you can actually see it or not. And there we are picked. This lock hasn't got it, but the ASSA pins do seem to work more effectively as well if you've got a little bit of counter milling on the top of the core. But give me a minute, we shall try something different and I'll be back. Right, this time we have a spool in two, but what I've actually done is I've changed the key pin to a shorter one, and we have this spool with a longer bit on the bottom. The idea of something like this is that if we pick one, we'll get the full set, then we'll get the counter rotation as we lift that shoulder up through the shear line, but then it won't set until we keep on going and going and going and going. So it initially makes you feel like you've possibly overset the pin, but we shall stick this one in and see how that one acts. So back in a second. Right, so here we are with the long spool, and we have the standard in one and the longer spool in two. So let's go in here. One is binding, so, and then we just get that little click and very, very slight movement on the core. Then we're on to two. Two is binding now, and we're getting slight counter rotation, and there we go, we're over that shoulder. But now you would normally expect the lock to open, but we're pushing and pushing and it just feels like a standard pin now until we push it high enough and we're open. So it makes it really feel like you've actually overset the pin when you haven't yet. So it's just another tricky one. So give me a minute and we shall try one more and I'll be back. Right, so this time we have the driving style spool. I've left the short key pin in there, so one should bind with the standard again. And then what will probably happen with this, with a bit of luck, is we shall get the full set. Then as this comes up, because of the shape of the middle, we'll get counter rotation and then back into our full set, so we think we've actually picked it, but then we'll need to pick that again to get it past that shoulder and get it fully picked. So I shall get this loaded up and we'll give this one a try, see how this looks. Right, so now we have the standard pin in one and the driving spool in number two. So as we suspected, number one is binding. So there we go, we've got the click and a slight turn on the core. So that is one picked. Then as we go on to two, we're getting counter rotation and click. So we assume that is picked with a spool, but we're not open yet. We'll work on it again. We've got counter rotation and click and we're open. So it gives you that full set initially, makes you think you've picked the pin when you actually haven't. So it is picking a spool twice effectively. So right, we shall try one more thing and see how that goes. Back in a minute. Right, so here we go. What I've done is it's now pinned up with 5 pins, so we've got a whole selection of what we've been looking at, just to give an idea of how the whole thing comes together once they're all in there. What we've got in 1, we have the serrated, 2, we've got the driving pin, 3, we've got the long spool, 4, we've got a standard spool, and in 5 we've got the T-pin. So the lock feels just the same as it did with standard pins in. Doesn't feel any different. But let's see how it's actually looking when we pick. So we've got number 1 binding. So we've got a click. And I'm actually getting a fraction of counter rotation from it with the spools, or the serrations, sorry. And there's another one. And another one. And another one, and then we get that slight movement on the core. So now we're looking at probably spools for everything else, which we know. So we're now onto the driving pin. And there we go, we've got that one picked. Then 3's not binding, but 4 is, and we're getting counter rotation. And we've got that click. I think I dropped it. There we go. 5, which is the T-pin, and I must have caught 3 and got that on the way through. So anyway, hopefully that answers a lot of the questions I've been asked, or will help with some of them, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.